When you hear the word student, what comes to mind? Someone young, focused on learning, carefree. Someone with less responsibilities.
People think about being a student, they might see a photo in a prospectus of a student on a sunny day, sat underneath a tree, reading a book.
That's only a part of the picture. For decades, higher education was built around a more linear student journey, one where for many students, studying was their full-time responsibility.
I did my undergraduate degree I started in 1994 and graduated in 1998. And after that, I sort of went into the workplace and did a few different things. And it wasn't until about 2011 that I came back to university to do my master's and then a PhD as well. When I was at university, life was really easy, I would say. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot less pressure, I think, on students back then. We had full student grants, which paid for our food and things. My parents paid for my rent. We didn't have any university fees or anything like that. We had no other responsibilities. The majority of us had come straight from school. We didn't have caring responsibilities. We were living away from home with other students. And so it was very much about the social life. And there was a lot less in terms of the university taking attendance. So, for example, there was no attendance taken at lectures. So if we didn't turn up for lectures, nobody knew, nobody chased you up about it.
Thinking about my time, higher education was like, I won't call it a meal ticket, but in my days, you finished university and you got a job. If you made a first class or a 2-1, you're guaranteed a job regardless of what you studied. What you find around those days are like city campuses. So my university was 6 hours away from home. So it's not somewhere you could run home every weekend. And there was no walking. You were a full-time student. You had one responsibility: go to school, get the grades, come out and get a job.
I was an undergraduate student at the end of the 90s, so I started in 1998. I think we were the first cohort that had no grants and it was student loans. I guess what I remember about it was I was probably quite a typical student in that I moved away from home, so I was from Perth, I moved to Glasgow, I was very excited about that. It was the 90s, so everything was in person. Things at uni were very different to how they are now, I would say, technologically anyway.
If you ask who was UK higher education designed for, it sort of depends how far back you go. The higher education sector has got bigger and bigger and has changed who it serves and how it serves them and how it researches and how it teaches over hundreds of years. But if I think about the current UK higher education system and the buildings and the services and the timetables and so on, it's really clear to me that lots and lots of the assumptions and structures and buildings and so on were designed for students perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. They were designed for students that are around longer, so definitely designed for undergraduates rather than our largely one-year postgraduate taught students. Definitely designed for students living away from home, and definitely designed for students who could spend all week and every day of all week being a student, just sort of hanging around at the disposal of the university and so on. And students' lives are very different now, and lots of those buildings and assumptions and timetables and structures then interact in a difficult way with the reality of what it's like to be a student now.
I think people necessarily know what it's like to be a student now. I think there's a lot of assumptions made about students and just jokes made about students being lazy and sponging off the state and, just using university as a time to not have to get a job kind of thing, which couldn't be further from the truth these days. I think those kinds of assumptions may well have been a legacy of my generation and generations before that, where the privileged went to university and didn't have to pay fees and things like that, so they didn't have to work.
Today, access to higher education has widened and continues to widen, bringing together people from different economic backgrounds, countries, and stages of life, each with different motivations, needs, and responsibilities. The lives students live today are often more layered, and so are the identities they hold.
I'm a mom of 4 kids, and juggling university with 4 kids is a handful. It's not easy.
I identify as so many different things. Like, I would say that I do identify with being a student, probably because I was involved in student politics, so I did have that kind of like very specific like students battling the university type experience. So I would say that I identify as a student. I also worked in hospitality since I was like 15. I think like as a hospitality worker, like that was kind of one of my bigger identities, and that's like what I did my dissertation and stuff on, so I really felt like quite passionately about that.
I am a full-time student and I'm a Christian as well. These are my 2 identities, being a student nurse and being a Christian.
Well, I would say student is definitely a big part of my identity, but also I think a queer student would also be very high on that list, because my queer identity is a really big part of my life.
With these layered realities come different pressures, responsibilities, and expectations.
I think when someone pictures a student, they see someone just no responsibility, not cooking, not running around after kids, just stress-free, where I'm always on the go.
Yeah, so I'm an international student, so I came to the UK from Germany originally.
Being an international student shapes a lot of things in my perspective towards working, learning, and doing everything in this country, because there's always this constant reminder of my status as being foreign in this country. I'm always reminded, not necessarily by people, but by myself as well, because I'm someone who is involved in lots of activism as well. So whenever I'm getting engaged with students, getting engaged with people, members of the public, I always tend to have this reminder in the back of my head that I am an international student and I should try as much as possible to act within the confines of my status.
University is not experienced in isolation. For many students, it is unfolding rapidly alongside life at an exhausting pace. The prevailing structures surrounding higher education still operate as though all students have the time, stability, and support to center their lives around study alone.
So when we say that someone is a full-time student, the assumption in lots of people's heads is that means they're available all week. Now, I would love students to have the money to be full-time, to not have to pay rent that was so high that meant they then had to go and do lots of part-time work. But I'm also a pragmatist, and pragmatically, most students now have to work. The Higher Education Policy Institute thinks it's around 2/3 of students, slightly higher actually for international students, slightly higher also in Scotland, despite lots of the rhetoric about home students getting free fees. And the truth about that then is that students simply have less time to devote to being a student. And it's not that it doesn't all fit together. It's possible to look after your family, have something of a social life, undertake your course, and do part-time work all in one week. But the way that fits together then depends on how timetables work, how public transport works, when deadlines are, and so on. And unless care is taken to make sure that can all fit together, it leaves students in a really, really difficult position when they're then trying to juggle what are this kind of really quite intense mix of things that add up to significantly longer hours than we would expect people perhaps in the labour market to work. You know, people in the labour market perhaps work 35, 40 hours. If we look at the average hours that students do, both on their course and in their part-time job, you're looking easily at 45, 50 hours work a week. And that takes some scheduling, depending on where work is, where campus is, and where home is.
Students are navigating realities that do not pause for deadlines or timetables. And when those expectations collide with reality, the consequences begin to surface.
There are lots and lots of ways in which the interaction between what the assumptions do and then what the reality is like for students can be a problem. There are hundreds, but I mean, let me just pick a few. One of the things that we assume is that when a student has a problem, either perhaps with another student or with an aspect of their university experience, that they will make a complaint. That makes lots of sense if you're around for 3 years and can wait the long time for it to be investigated and the long time for it to be resolved. Perhaps you need an appeal, perhaps you need to go to the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. If you're a one-year postgraduate student and something happens halfway through the year, that system just doesn't work for you. And so your ability then to have that issue resolved and then addressed so that your experience is as you were promised, completely destroyed.
I think when I first got kind of confronted with the data that we get from our advice center, for example, it's the amount of discrimination that people face. Homophobia is on the rise, transphobia is on the rise, racism is on the rise, and we also saw a lot of anti-Asian racism, especially on our campus, and how that affects people on a day-to-day basis. I have had experience of queerphobia before, but just the way that it's so systemic to higher education was quite surprising to me.
As a lecturer, you maybe are not aware of what people are bringing into the classroom just if you go to a class and the students come in and you teach and then they go away again. But a lot of us have roles as personal tutors, and there's been different roles that I've been involved in, such as academic disability coordinator, student engagement officer, those kinds of things, which mean you spend quite a lot of time talking to individual students and maybe putting in adjustments or recommended adjustments or supporting them in some way. And through that, you hear about a lot of things that students are dealing with in their personal lives. And it can cover, all sorts of different things, from problems at home, dealing with poverty or deprivation, dealing with I suppose anything that you can think of that you have to go through in life is happening to students whilst they're here. One of the things that I've really noticed as well, that these things can be particularly exacerbated or difficult for international students.
I mean, I think individual lecturers and staff members get it. They live in the same world we all live in just now. But yeah, a lot of those policies and procedures and requirements, I think, are based on a time that's not quite up to date with what's happening now for a lot of students.
There's a lot of our job and our approach to teaching which requires a lot of flexibility, because one size does not fit all anymore at all, and we recognise that as lecturers.
The cause of the mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
Around the world have now reported more than 1 million coronavirus.
I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Following COVID-19 and as well as the cost of living crisis, you're finding more students working to support their families. You're finding more matured students. Some of them have caring responsibilities as well. I can't imagine in my days going to tell my lecturer, sorry, I'm not going to come to class today, I've got a job. But that's the reality students find themselves in right now. And that's the reality we're having to also deal with and see how to best support students in their current present circumstances.
I started uni when we were still kind of online a little bit, so I had one in-person class every 2 weeks. So it was like, how for 1 hour? So how do you make friends when you see them for 1 hour and then don't see them for 2 weeks? So I think that was really a bit of a shock.
COVID, that's had a huge impact, I think, on loads of aspects of the student experience. Even just from the students coming, had that huge disruption to their own academic development. So a lot of people, obviously immediately after that, didn't have the same experience of doing exams and doing sort of traditional written work and submissions and things like that because of COVID happening, leaving aside all the social things that they missed out on as well. So there was a big sort of gap in confidence, probably.
As universities were forced to become more digital and internationally connected, new layers of complexity evolved. The rapid rise in international student recruitment also raised a deeper, quieter question. Was the system truly prepared for the level of support, integration, and understanding these students will need?
I think two of the really big changes that we've seen over the past 10, 15, 20 years concern student wellbeing and mental health and international students. So let's start with international students. There's been a huge expansion in the number of international students, and not only a huge expansion undertaking postgraduate taught qualifications. That, of course, then means that you have lots and lots of students who've got a kind of double challenge. The old challenge for international students was understanding the language, understanding the culture, understanding the weather, working out where to live, understanding what the rules were with a landlord, and all of those kind of things that are difficult enough for being an international student. There were also then a set of challenges for postgraduate taught students. Particularly those coming to a new university, because you have to relearn all of the rules, you have to relearn the campus, you have to relearn how to get on with people and so on. When you combine those two into one person that's both an international student and a postgraduate taught student, that is really significant in terms of the different sets of support that ideally you would put in. And if we're honest, a set of support that lots of universities kind of didn't put in and kind of took for granted.
The first week that international students come to campus, and it's supposed to be welcome week, it's supposed to be like a week where you find friends and like all of these things, but a lot of international students, especially at my uni, have to go through the international check-in, is what we call it, like in that first week, and like stand in the queue for like ages and ages and ages and miss a lot of the activities that are happening. So I think they're already at a disadvantage and at that.
In terms of opportunities in the university, I have not been sidelined. I have been given access to a lot of things. I have been class rep, I've been department rep, I've been involved in my trade union and all that. But then in terms of working and actually getting by, it hasn't been easy due to the economic impact of my sponsoring country and the realities I have here. All international students are being put through the process of verifying our financial strength and all that before coming in. But that doesn't take into account of people, especially from third world countries who have shaky economies, whose economies are shaky and are very, very unstable. So the strength of your sponsoring family or yourself as well before coming in is seen as nice. But when you come in and things go sour and inflation goes skyrocketing, the budgeting you did before coming is then unable to sustain you while in university. And so living on the particular work limits that is being placed on you becomes very straining.
I think international students have an enormous amount to cope with. So they're paying enormous fees. That's standard across the university sector. They're far away from home sometimes. They're maybe studying in a language that isn't their first language and expected to meet all of those academic criteria in a second language. But also things like having to pay for upfront for the NHS, which is thousands of pounds, regardless of whether they use it, and not always getting a great service if they do use it. So there's all of these hidden costs that I hadn't really been aware of.
There's a 20 hours work limit for international students, and a way to prove how that is not realistic is that when I look at my colleagues who are home students, who have funding and who do not have fees to pay, and I look at myself who have no funding and have fees to pay and have the 20 hours limits, they end up working most times up to 30 hours a week despite having funding and having no tuition. Whereas I, who don't have funding and have heavy tuition to pay, I'm limited to the 20 hours. So the fact that they have to work more even though they have that support, reflects highly on how 20 hours work limit is unrealistic for anybody.
I can't imagine if I was working and doing my PhD, which is what a lot of international students sadly have to grapple with. 20 working hours, no finance, and then you still have to be a full-time student as well, and then responsibilities and all. In my case, with 4 young children, I was lucky because I had someone say to me, take care of these children and focus on your PhD. But looking back, I'll call that privilege. Because if I wasn't privileged, maybe I would have gone mad. Because there are days as a student, I'm like, who sent me on this errand? What am I looking for?
The other problem that I see a lot of is with visas, and especially if somebody fails an assessment. So under normal circumstances, students have several opportunities to resit these. But if you're on a limited student visa and you have to leave the country at a certain time, if your resit falls outside of that, then you have to do that resit from home, so you don't necessarily have the same resources. Or there's just these whole more layers and layers of stress and finances, and it can make it really, really difficult. I think a lot of our international students as well come with families, and so they have lots of responsibilities and don't have those same networks for maybe childcare, but still also have to get jobs.
For international students, if they're coming to do a shorter, like a top master's, they've got to master a lot in that time, and there's not a lot of space for making mistakes and for learning through actually trying things out in a 1.5 year course, particularly when you've got a hard deadline of the end of your student visa and you want to try and get the graduate visa, and that is a major stress for people. So they don't feel that you have the luxury of being able to fail.
The debate on international students and the debate on immigration is never the real debate. It's never really about, how to pay for public services, the kind of country we want. It's always about fear stories and small boats and the way that they're kind of, erasing our culture and all of this kind of nonsense that you see. And the result of that then is that international students get absolutely caught up in the middle of that. At best, some people think that the only role that international students should play is to hand us lots of money. And I have a view on this, which is, of course, it is the case that the UK should be able to sell its higher education and its reputation around the world. But I've got two preconditions on how that should work if that happens. One, if we sell it, we should make sure that the people selling it are honest about what people are going to get, honest about the cost of living, honest about student accommodation, honest about the skills that people are going to receive as a result of taking part in their course, honest about how practical the course is and whether it will lead to full-time employment. And there are lots of problems with the way that the higher education is sold as it stands. But the other thing that we should do if we're going to have lots of international students is that we should ask ourselves whether it's morally and politically okay for a country that used to run the British Empire should be sucking money out of developing countries in order to fund education for its own students. I am not comfortable overall with a system that says we will take large amounts of money out of the families of people in Pakistan and Nigeria and India and so on to fund our own students' higher education.
Layered onto the unique challenges many international students face is a growing phenomenon increasingly defining modern student life itself: time poverty.
University was not designed for mature students like myself because we have a lot on our plate. We've got work, we've got children, we've got a home, we're cooking, we're picking and dropping kids, and we're trying to adjust our lifestyle.
A typical day of my life during placements is to wake up at 5, get ready for placement at 7, come back at 7:30 at night, do that for 3 days in a week.
I worked one job that I'd worked full-time throughout the whole summer, where I was from in Dundee for the first 2 years, and then I'd work a term time one, so one job during the summer and one during uni, and then when uni was happening I'd probably work 2 or 3 shifts a week. It kind of depended, it was quite flexible, but it was really difficult sometimes because I started working for my first couple of years in an event suite and it was open until really late. Sometimes I'd finish 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and then trying to get home and stuff like that. It was really difficult, and then I'd wake up and I'd be really tired. I would try and pick my shifts to fit around uni, so I would start at 5 or 6 so I didn't have to miss any class, but then that would mean I'd be working until 1 in the morning, and then I'd get home and I'd be really, really tired when I'd wake up for my 9 o'clock class the next day. So it did fit around studies well, but it made me just exhausted all the time. And then sometimes I had to if I started at 5, I would have to leave, and if I had a class till 5, I would have to leave early because I'd have to like walk to work and get changed and get clocked in for 5. So then it was, yeah, I felt really awkward about like leaving when you're in a busy class. To like get up and leave is not great, and I'd have to bring my work uniform and carry it about all day, which was really annoying. And yeah, I would feel bad if I was leaving class early to go to work, or especially during assignment season. Sometimes I would have an assignment due on like the Friday and have 3 shifts during the week, and I was like, oh my gosh, like when I was actually working those evenings, all I would be thinking about is the assignment. I'd get like a 20-minute break, and sometimes I'd like sit and do my, like get my laptop out and be working on my assignment during my break and stuff. So it was really difficult.
You know, when we talk about students today and think about work ethic, a lot of the students, they're holding down at least 1, if not 2 other jobs. They're paying for cars, insurance, and, you know, possibly housing and things like that, and all of those other things that you have to do in life, and attend university and meet deadlines and assessments. And I think that really demonstrates such an incredible work ethic that they have, that they're juggling all of these things. And to be honest, I think that their work ethic is probably, it's a lot better than my work ethic when I was at university, that's for sure.
I think it's so outdated to think of students in the kind of way of like, oh, I'm here full time, I'm here for like 3-4 years and then I'll find a good job. No, it's students are here like maybe part-time or maybe for a postgrad degree and are working part-time or even kind of half and half.
I think there's more of a balancing act to do now, and I think staff members, lecturers just in general, or as a sector in general, we need to recognise that balancing act, and that actually when you're a student at university now, it isn't just all about university like it was when I was there. It's about so many other things going on, and that's a frustration for everybody, I think, students and staff.
A couple of years ago, we undertook some national polling on what we called burdens. And what we meant by that was, what are the things that students are doing throughout the week that aren't necessarily about being a student? So people think about being a student, they might see a photo in a prospectus of a student on a sunny day, sat underneath a tree, reading a book, or bumping into their friends, or hanging out in the library or the social learning centre, or whatever it might be. But what we wanted to know was, what else do students spend their time doing? And it perhaps won't surprise you to learn, for example, students spend a huge amount of time travelling around their city or their region, either getting to campus, because they quite often have to live further and further away from campus than perhaps people imagine. And then often they then live quite away from work too. So if you imagine this kind of triangle of the 3 places you need to be while you're a full-time student, you've got where you work, often not in the city these days, huge collapse in the number of part-time jobs in hospitality and retail over the past couple of years means that students are doing other sorts of jobs. Often those jobs, by the way, are not during the day, so a significant number of students now doing work in the night shifts and so on. So they're further away, they're working in the night, and that will be one point of the triangle. Then there's the campus, and of course, if the campus and the timetable is not very intelligent, still assumes that students are around all week and can pop in. I met a couple of students at a course rep event a couple of weeks ago whose timetable involved being in for an hour at 10 on a Tuesday with a 2-hour gap, and then another hour, and then a 3-hour gap, and then another hour. Those gaps not quite long enough to go home, and not quite long enough to go and do a shift anywhere, so they're on campus all day, but only for 3 hours. So if you think about the interaction then between when work might want you in, often on a 0 hours contract, when the timetable might require you to be in, and where your home is, that is actually quite a tricky thing to juggle. Most people shuffle throughout the week between home and work rather than these 2 locations. And look, it won't surprise you to learn, for example, that there was a strong correlation between poor mental health and the amount of time people spend, for example, on the bus. And that's about not being able to fit it all in. Then, of course, for some students, you end up with interesting intersections and interactions. So add in perhaps being a parent and having to drop the kids off at school or pick the kids up from school or whatever. That adds another layer of complexity into the burden mix. So when you add up those kind of different burdens that different sorts of students have, depending on the type of accommodation they're in, where they're living, the kind of job they have, and the intensity and complexity of the timetable of their course, for some students it can be almost impossible to pull off the juggling act that they were sort of sold when someone said you should be a student.
Student Working Lives, a HEPI report published in 2025, found that 66% of students now work to cover basic living costs. And according to Save the Students' National Student Money Survey, rent takes the biggest portion of the average student budget at around £529 a month. Students are working longer hours, committing more of their income towards rent, and building stronger patterns of financial responsibility that many assumptions held by landlords and accommodation providers around student renting have not fully caught up with. For many students, safe and secure accommodation becomes another source of pressure, exclusion, and instability.
My first experience of student accommodation was negative in terms of it was always very small, there was no common space. What struck me the most was all of the signs that saying, don't do this, don't do that, if you do this you'll be fined, if you do this you'll be punished, if you do this you'll be thrown out. It felt very much like behaviour was trying to be controlled with a stick.
When I went to like private rent, it was really, really difficult because that's like a whole other kettle of fish. See, trying to like find a flat, which is, there's like no flat. So trying to find a flat on my own, well, I was with friends, but the three of us who had no idea how to do that, trying to find a flat was so difficult. Reading all the documentation and getting guarantors and, oh my gosh, it's so difficult to like wrap your head around. And I feel like I felt really vulnerable because I didn't understand those kind of stuff. Like I feel like I could have really easily been like taken advantage of, and I was lucky that my parents were able to like look over stuff and make sure everything was kind of right. And then I lived in the one flat for 3 years. And it was a good flat, like it was a great location and that was really nice, but like we had mice, we had like mold, our heating would always break and our boiler wouldn't work. And like the stress of having to, there was always something to report to the letting agent. And then them come back, then they were always getting a repair person to come and fix it, and there would need to be somebody home, and we were all full-time students and we all worked full-time. So it then got really, really stressful trying to just like get the time to sort all those things and like figure everything out. And like I say, like it's your first time doing it as well as having university was really difficult.
Traditionally, universities didn't worry too much about accommodation. So they often would provide accommodation on campus, perhaps for first-year students that were undergraduates, but didn't really worry too much about other years and other students, because the private sector would take care of it. It would build accommodation. There were private landlords that would convert their homes. All of that happens, but it happens quite slowly. And what rarely works is suddenly putting tens of thousands of extra students into a region or a city. And if you take, for example, where I'm sat today in the middle of Glasgow, for the 2 years following the pandemic, huge increases in the number of international students. And if there's one thing we can guarantee that an international student needs, it's somewhere to sleep. You know, they can't live at home and commute unless they're very, very rich. And of course, that means suddenly you need tens of thousands of extra bed spaces. Those bed spaces were not available. None of the universities in the city thought, we better make sure there's enough accommodation. And then for a couple of years, in that 2 years after the initial pandemic, there were families turning up at the door of student associations saying, I have nowhere to live. My agent has told me it will be easy to find somewhere to live. And as a result, we had lots and lots of problems that to some extent we're still working our way through.
In terms of housing, I struggled a lot. Being a student, most landlords are hesitant to give letting to students. I remember an application where I applied with someone, and then in the application we were both asked about our financial strength, and then I gave like a summary of my earnings in a year together with my friends, and that effectively met the requirements for that letting. But then we were told we didn't get it without a clear reason. So It's been very tough. There are different hurdles to accommodation in this country for international students. You need guarantors. Most times you're asked to provide guarantor. And then you see the guarantors, what I don't understand is how will I get a guarantor if I'm new and I don't know anybody here? Most of the prices are just unreasonable. You then end up with students going to get accommodation far away from university and having to commute an hour or so to come to university because the ones that are close by are overpriced by landlords. These are the issues we face, going from unreasonably high rent to guarantors to endless checks, and then just the perception of landlords not wanting to let properties to students is an issue that I think has really affected me. It affected me a lot before I finally found where I am.
Students are a very valuable renter, and the reason we can in the industry afford for them to pay less is one, because they have a smaller unit, because they don't need all the spaces of a family home, etc. But two, the income stream generally of a student is quite predictable because you see the university and you know the future goals of the university. So we know that next year there's going to be another 20,000 students coming in, another 20,000 students. So generally the industry is funded because of that income stream is very stable. In world-class educational establishments, we need to give them good accommodation so they feel safe, they integrate well, they make friends, and they can then focus on their studies.
Through expanded support services, universities and the wider sector are increasingly trying to respond to these realities. When we look beyond statistics and support strategies, what do students' lived experiences reveal about their well-being?
When I was at university, mental health really wasn't something that was recognised. But having said that, I don't think it was an enormous I don't remember sort of many friends sort of having moments of crisis or difficulties. It was certainly nothing that was spoken about. We didn't have the same level of support available in the university, but I think that was because we didn't need it at that time as much.
It was the constant studying, late nights, and the burnout. And I think emotionally, I just felt like to give up. And enough was enough, and I couldn't do it anymore because I felt like I wasn't giving enough time to the children, and I felt like I can't do this. But my faith just kept me going, and I knew I could do it.
One major thing that I think that I've seen over time is the resilience of students these days. That also cuts across the family, and you find a single mother or mothers who have their kids combining work and education together. But that resilience level is really, really something that has changed over the years. These days, the resilience level is really, really high, combined with the mental health of students.
If I'm struggling with my mental health, for example, I think people get it that would affect your studies. But if you, for example, come to a university service for a mental health problem, they don't give you access to a hardship fund. They give you access to counselling, and they don't see the whole everything together. And so I think that's the issue.
There's loads of things like in society and individually that cause people to have struggles at university and to have mental health struggles.
There's lots of evidence post-pandemic that the pandemic had a significant scarring effect on young people. And whilst it is true that there's been some bounce back in terms of the general mental health of students, there's also some evidence of long-term scarring. And when you put all of that together and you put a general view in society which is positive, which is students being more honest about their mental health, people being willing to have a conversation about mental health in the same way they used to on physical health, it means that all the numbers are through the roof. The number of students that need support, the number of students that perhaps would need to take a pause and look after their health and so on. Mental health setbacks can affect all sorts of people, where they need to take a day off or a week off or perhaps a month off. If you're an international student, you can't slow down because the visa doesn't really allow you to do that. You can't have a setback. If you're a home student, the way our student finance system works is it's still pretty much wedded to the idea of academic years, And that, you know, if you're on a 4-year Scottish degree or a 3-year undergraduate degree in England or whatever, that's how long you spend doing it for, and maybe you have to repeat a year. That really completely rules out the idea of being ill, having a setback, needing a couple of months to pause, needing to take time out to look after the family, or whatever that issue might be. It all assumes that we will ram people through the system at top speed.
Another major shift entering this already complex reality is AI in higher education.
We see a lot of students who are falling foul of AI misuse, academic misconduct, so that the growth in those kind of cases, I think across all universities from what I've read, has grown exponentially, like just even over the past sort of 2-3 years, and that's definitely been a huge change. The universities, I think, have been a little bit slow to be clear about that, and I think that's because they've been hit by it on the back foot as well, that it's just such a massive change, and it's got huge implications for how we assess things at all. That I think there was a bit of confusion among students about what they're allowed to do, what they're not. This thing is available, it seems to be everywhere, why would I not use it? I don't know how realistic it is to expect students not to use it at all, and I don't think that is what universities expect, but it seems like a really slippery slope kind of thing.
A further growing uncertainty for many students is the value of higher education itself. Because for many already working to support their education, building experience sometimes unrelated to their course, and navigating life alongside university, the question is no longer simply, will I get a job? It becomes a question of value, direction, and how higher education fits into the realities and futures students are already navigating.
But I think the kind of traditional, what being successful as a student and at university is getting a good job afterwards. I think that's still what everyone, like especially staff, think, and I think that's what would have been thought about in like the 80s or 90s. It's like you go to university and then you get a good job. But now having a degree does not mean you're going to get a good job. And most people I know who graduated with me this summer, nobody's got a job. Everyone's still working in like the hospitality or the service jobs that they worked in before, and they've not spent time really like organising and joining unions or different things in there, trying to improve their conditions, because they're promised this dream of you're going to get this great job that's just not the reality. And I think people are really worried when they go to graduate because there is no jobs and it's so competitive.
I think a lot of pressure is being placed on universities these days to actually get students ready for work. Back in the days, you find someone staying, I was in one organization for 10 years. You don't find that happening with this generation of students. They stay 1 year, 2 years, they're moving on to the next job. So employers are also not very willing to train people. They want you work ready, as in hit the ground running. So we are training students. Basically, there's the theoretical part of it, there's the practical side of it, and that's why I'm so passionate about work placements. I didn't get those opportunities because they didn't just exist in my time. Like I said, go to school, come out, look for work. But now we're seeing more students getting into work, which gives them the kind of experience, one way or the other, or even transferable skills.
If you're a student who perhaps has a full-time job as well as being a full-time student, and you're building your career in that full-time job. I met a student a few weeks ago at a class rep conference who had started out working behind a bar and was now a full-time supervisor and had got really great skills out of that and had done some of the kind of training programs and so on. And she was saying, I don't want to be a part-time student, but I just wish I could do slightly less than full-time. I wish I could build my credits that built towards my honours degree a bit more slowly. I wish I still got some support from the state, and I just wish that I could do that a little more slowly. But my university works in years, not in modules and credits. The thing that I would say to policymakers is, don't be automatically seduced by the idea that we won't need buildings and spaces and campuses for people to come together and interact, because people still want that. Also, don't be seduced by the idea that lifelong learning means we don't have to spend money on people pursuing education early on in life. Don't be seduced by the idea that international students will pay for it all, because it's immoral and they won't, and it's not fair when they do. What you should do if you're a policymaker is say to yourself, look, if it is the case that we're an ageing population, And if it is the case that it therefore doesn't matter that people are in a proper career and full-time by the time they're 21, university in people's mid-20s, early and late 20s should be a period where people can slowly mix immersion in a subject where they do high-level learning and the other things, and be able to mix them in a healthy way and in a valuable way.
Threading through the consequences of this collision between assumption and reality is the relentless mathematics of budgeting. Money may be called the root of all evil, but for many students today, it becomes the root of pressure, compromise, and simply trying to stay afloat.
In terms of money issues, I didn't have as much of those. It was more just like learning how to be an adult. I feel like these are not things you get taught in school. Like I said, I started uni when I was 17. So that was the more difficult aspect for me personally, but I have loads of friends that like money was a huge issue for them, and they weren't supported at all by their parents or by the university, and they had to work, like especially like my flatmate was a nursing student and she had to work so much while also being on placement and things. So I saw like everyone else really did have like loads of challenges and didn't have those kind of support systems, but I was lucky that I kind of got support.
I think the hardest moment for me was in second year. I got a call from family highlighting how rapidly the inflation was coming on, how the Naira was depreciating, and how my school fees was still my school fees. So coming to reality of my tuition was fixed, it had effectively doubled in my local currency, was one of the most traumatic news I had. Actually, the most traumatic news I had been in this country, because I came here at 19, not being someone who had work experience prior to coming, having zero responsibilities on me, having everything handed out to me since I was actually born, and coming to the reality that, oh, you might actually need to pull lumps of weight yourself. So that experience, or that wake-up call, was actually a very hard, one of the hardest moments of my life.
I would say I'm like the average, like what universities think is the average student. Like, I think that like they would see me as the mold. Like I'm from like a middle-class nuclear family who, you know, parents that supported me at university. And I think like I see that throughout my university journey. I kind of saw that like they see all students as someone who would be kind of like me, which isn't like not fair, because most people I know are not in that position, and are like, and they have so many challenges, and I think that like that is kind of what's assumed, and that's just not the reality anymore. I think most people do work, people have caring responsibilities, some people have children, and people have jobs, and there's just so many different like competing demands, and I think that the universities often don't see that, and they think that everyone's kind of similar to me, is what I would say.
The overarching question running through these stories is whether the voices living these realities are meaningfully shaping the systemic change now needed.
I think we are heard on certain issues, heard on when there is a bill specific about education. But when it comes to other things that affect students, I think students are the last people that they're hearing from. Like, I'm thinking of the housing bill in Scotland, for example. Purpose-built like student accommodations were the last thing on their minds until students came and were like, no, we need some provisions for that.
Thinking about the makeup of your student body, in truth, it isn't that difficult to work out what they might need as long as you talk to them. You know, what might they need in terms of support and advice and accommodation and all of the other things that we know about living. But for all sorts of reasons, that wasn't really done at scale. And as a result, we had lots and lots of problems that to some extent we're still working our way through.
If I had like one thing to say to like policymakers, is just like talk to students. I think, and like don't talk about us, talk to us and talk with us. I think what I've experienced a lot of the times is that like policymakers, also people in universities, they think they know everything about students. They think they, because they've been to university or because they work in a university, they know everything. But their views are often like kind of like 20 years outdated. And so I really want to invite people to speak with us and talk to us and make decisions with us.
For the people in power, and I'm not just talking about national governments, I'm not just talking about the Scottish Government or the Westminster Government, I'm also talking about local authorities, the people who run NHS services and so on. Unless we can find a way to talk to the people who run things about what it's like to be a student, their health, their ambitions, where they live, their working conditions and so on. Unless we can find a way to be honest about that, they are never going to take those things into account. And it means that in their head, they will continue to imagine that all students are home students, middle class, being supported by their parents, in halls of residence, and frankly, the Vice-Chancellor will look after them, when the truth is that they have huge sets of needs and public services have lots of responsibilities to these citizens, whichever city we're talking about.
Students are professionals. They are the next generation. I mean, it's an insane idea that we treat students not like that. I mean, it's completely insane for me. You know, we have talent that have worked. We're speaking just to you from Nigeria. The challenges you've had to get to come to study in Glasgow are insane. The same from a kid around the corner. The same, you know, it's a very difficult process to get into university. You've got to really fight, especially if you're not coming from a privileged background. So you have this highly motivated generation studying higher education.
After 2 years as an elected student leader in the UK, listening to and representing thousands of students across different backgrounds, identities, and experiences, one thing became increasingly clear. Student voice cannot remain a metric or institutional formality. It must become part of the culture, structure, and foundational redesign needed urgently. Working meaningfully with students creates a more agile, connected, and responsive student experience approach, one that does not treat challenges as isolated issues solved individually. Students do not experience these realities in fragments. They are interconnected. So the systems, policies, and communities surrounding them should be too. Not just to help students survive, but to build systems that truly empower students to integrate and thrive within communities.
I'm very proud of being a student nurse. That's part of the things that makes me happy whenever I remember it. When life gets intense and discouraging, the knowledge of being a student nurse and a graduate nurse in a short while makes me happy.
I do generally have enjoyed uni. Like, I liked writing essays and I liked learning and I loved going to class, but not being able to, what I didn't like was not being able to do that fully, if that makes sense.
When I completed all my assignments and all my essays after the first semester, that really brought me joy, because I knew, I didn't believe in myself, but after that I believed in myself, that I can do it. I can study and be a mom.
There's so many people who care so much about student issues and that care so much about students generally, and I think that community of queer students, I think, is really wonderful for me.
The current generation of students, if you look at it from an age perspective, is that people are very community-minded. They're very concerned about the climate. They're very concerned about social justice. They're very, very concerned to make sure that injustices are fixed, that corruption is eradicated, and that things work. They're ambitious about who they are and where they are.
Students are adapting, adjusting, absorbing, finding ways through. It is time for the systems around them to catch up.
One thing that I was told by multiple staff members was that you're meant to spend 40 hours a week on university. Like, this is your full-time job. So you might not have that much contact time and time in the class, but with the readings and with the studying and with the assignments, you should be spending 40 hours a week on university work. And that is just not the reality for anyone, I don't think. Even not people who've got to work and stuff, but even people who play sports or have involved themselves in the university community. No one is spending 40 hours a week, and I think that the fact that staff still have that expectation on you just puts that burden on you that you're like, I'm not doing enough, I can't succeed because I'm not spending 40 hours a week. But everyone I know at university works. That's not the reality, and I think that it would be really nice if, I think staff maybe some are starting to realise that, but not everyone is, and I think that staff really need to understand that it's not the same as when they were at university.
Universities can help with being more flexible in their curriculum.
If the system could be more accommodating of international student nurses, what should be done? One thing I would just say is to make it fair. Make us the accessibility to support fair for both students. Because we do know currently that international students, yes, we are not entitled to public fund, but even placement expenses, we don't get it. If I travel for placement, no matter how far it is, I pay by myself. Whereas home students, when they go for placements, they get paid back travel expenses for the placements. So I think if it can be made that way, that although we are not claiming public funds, but for the expenses for placements, because the placements are unpaid. So if the placements are unpaid, I think it's fair for us to at least have our travel expenses covered by the practice education facilitation.
I think I would fix the funding of higher education. I think that's a huge issue right now.
I would love to see a lot more childcare being brought into university campuses and as more available for students. And I think that would do a lot for younger generations because they would feel welcome in universities, and that might counter some of this imposter syndrome that we see from students. Because they've already been and lived on campus, you know, if they've been in the nursery there or something. And I think for international students, I think probably the things that need to change the most are things that aren't necessarily in the control of universities, so flexibility around visa applications.
Really, what policymakers need to do is sit down and say to themselves, how can we design a set of interventions that makes it worrying, difficult and scary to lie or deceive students? And what can we put in place that reduces the amount of competition between universities rather than amps it up? How can we cause a situation where more of that tuition fee gets spent on students' education rather than teddy bears, agent fees, vast marketing departments and so on? It is possible, other countries do it, but we really do need policymakers at every level to sit down and say to themselves, how can we cause that to happen in each of the 4 nations of the UK?
The Social Hub started life as a student hotel, and I really believe that we made a big impact in the industry. Since the student hotel and now the Social Hub is here, we have seen a lot of student operators really building good quality common space. I think fundamentally treating students like customers. Again, the beginning of the industry, so I wouldn't say the industry today, but certainly 15, 20 years ago, students felt like a commodity. So the industry kind of didn't really like their customers as such. And what we did was we treated students like next generational talent. We trusted them. We brought them in contact with co-workers, with young professionals, with the neighbours. We gave them great space to meet and mingle. I'm really passionate about next generation. I'm very passionate about mixing people together, using design to stimulate the behaviour you want. I think these are all easy things. I don't like sticks. Don't tell me with a sign that I'm not allowed to do something. Give me a carrot to do something else. And I think those little nuances as operators, I think we can change the world.
The change we need isn't one idea. It is a culture that stops merely managing students and starts co-creating with them, an approach that recognizes how profoundly student life has evolved and why we are not your student.
Being a student today means working, having a probably rat-infested, mouldy flat that your landlord is ripping you off for, or having to pay like £1,000 a month to be in this really glam student accommodation. Probably not having great mental health and being quite isolated.
Being a student means juggling life, believing in yourself, and just go for it.
Being a student today means a lot of access, I would say. So access to like loads of kind of books that you like would not otherwise have access to through your university. It's having access to like amazing academics who teach you. It's having access to kind of lots of these services that are within a university, but it's also being a student today is at the same time also a struggle sometimes.
So the system that supports students today needs to understand their current realities, understand there is no one size fits all, and then most importantly, the students also need to know how to speak up.
The system that supports students today needs to become reflective of where they're actually at.
I mean, a student of today is the future. It's as simple as that.
The student experience today, I would say, it can be a good one, but it's a challenging one as well. There's a lot more of life to balance in with student life, I guess.
I think above all else, students today are ambitious in ways that people never really want to talk about. And if I could say anything, I would say we should never let go of the idea that part of higher education isn't just about, building your own skills and your own knowledge, but it's also about unleashing and unlocking that passion students have for building a better society, and making sure that they have the tools and the spaces and the rooms and the room booking systems and the budgets that enable them to do that too. Because when we do that, that gives an extra special, extra purpose to this whole thing that we call higher education.
Being an international student nurse for me means being able to juggle being 100% competent in your studies and your proficiencies, and juggle the financial constraints it has on you and your family, while working within the limits that is being placed on us because we are law-abiding. And also, just overall being happy and being compassionate, because even no matter how much knowledge I have, being in placements, there's a lot that my smile does for patients than even whatever I'm about to say to them.
Students today are rediscovering themselves, discovering themselves, and uncovering a lot of things about themselves. It's a transformative journey.
Now you see the full picture. Let's rewrite the story together.